thanks to Sarah Wheaton and the panelists for that very insightful conversation. And thank you so much for joining all of us here at Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. My name is Amanda Crayley, and I'm joined on stage by my colleague Isabella Contour. Together, we work for Politico's Research and Analysis Division, which produces independent, in-depth, data-driven research on some of Europe's most pressing policy questions. We cover everything from climate to tech to trade and defense, so we're always looking at this intersection between industrial capacity, regulation, and geopolitics. And today we want to spend a few minutes with you talking about something that doesn't often get top billing when we're talking about strategic autonomy, but one that we feel kind of neatly encapsulates a lot of what's being discussed today, and that is space.
So when we think of space, we may initially think of exploration or of science, but it's increasingly being defined as its role as critical infrastructure, encompassing satellites, but also secure communications, navigation, and intelligence. It's really about who controls the systems that our economies, militaries, and societies rely on a daily basis. And for this reason, space is the ultimate test case for European strategic autonomy. It's where sovereignty, but also security and competitiveness all converge into one. And it's also where Europe's ambitions and vulnerabilities are on full display. Space is no longer just a frontier. It's the backbone of our daily lives and also a theater of geopolitical rivalry. And that's why Europe's ability to secure its place in space will ultimately determine whether its vision of autonomy and competitiveness remains an aspiration or becomes a reality.
The war in Ukraine has made this abundantly clear. Europe cannot fully guarantee secure communications without outside help, namely from US provider Starlink, which the Commission has funded to the tune of $180 million last year. That was a pragmatic choice, and it worked, but it really underscores how we're still reliant on third country systems for something as fundamental as secure battlefield communications. At the same time, Europe risks ceding next-generation space technology to competitors like the US and China. There are industrial gaps that are very crucial, like the multi-year Ariane 6 delay, which have left Europe reliant on foreign launch capacity at the very moment that space has become essential for defense, intelligence, and climate monitoring. There's also fragmented governance, with only about half of EU member states with national space laws. That makes cross-border investment and scaling more challenging, and investment levels are still far lower than global peers, and which this leaves startups that underfunded rather than able to scale at capacity that's needed. And this isn't merely a matter of prestige. This is really about the ability for Europe to put satellites into orbit when we need them most. So let's take a closer look at the numbers. Here you can see how global investment is distributed across regions. The United States combines massive amounts of public funding, nearly 50 billion euros if you add together NASA and the Department of Defense space budgets, with a very vibrant private capital ecosystem. And it's this particular combination that has made Starlink what it is today. Just in 2024, Starlink completed a record 134 satellite launches and now operates almost 8,000 satellites that are currently in orbit, which, for context, is more than the rest of the world put together. China's approach is different, but also equally robust. It follows a state-led strategy that combines provincial subsidies and then brings together mega constellation projects that aim together to rival Starlink as well. But their model really focuses on blending the civil, commercial, and military objectives, meaning that every single launch is a part of a broader national strategy. And then there's Europe, which has historically spent far less and channels most of its investments into infrastructure like launchers and ground stations. And infrastructure is critical, of course, but without strong downstream markets and services that really create demand, Europe risks remaining a spacefaring continent, but never a true space power. And it's precisely this challenge that we want to explore a bit today, which is how to close that gap between ambition and capacity, and how to ensure that Europe doesn't just build good rules for space, but rather has the capabilities to back it up.
And so Europe's challenge is not just a financial one in nature, it's also institutional. Right now, there's a patchwork of both legal frameworks and governance systems, as 14 of the 27 EU member states have enacted national space laws, while another 5 are still drafting them. This fragmentation means that operators face multiple licensing regimes, uneven requirements, and also no single point of accountability at the European level. That's why the EU's June 2025 space package is so significant. Its centerpiece, the proposed regulation for an EU Space Act, would establish a more harmonized licensing and registration regime, introduce mandatory cybersecurity protocols and risk assessments, set debris mitigation and sustainability standards, and also give the EU Agency for the Space Program a stronger mandate to track incidents and also coordinate oversight over everything. The package also included a vision for the European space economy, and it essentially outlined a roadmap to align space policy with Europe's wider industrial and also digital strategies, including procurement and also new financial mechanisms to mobilize private capital. And this is particularly critical because the EU's private space sector is vibrant, but woefully underfunded. Initiatives like IRIS², the EU's secure connectivity constellation, will really only succeed if there is a healthy mix of both public procurement, but also of private investment. And this is what the vision essentially aims to create with that virtuous cycle. So in short, the space package is Europe's attempt to close the regulatory and industrial gaps that currently hold the space sector back. And it's about making sure that when we talk about autonomy, there's a legal framework backing that lets Europe act quickly, cohesively, and competitively. And this next slide is actually one of my favorites because it really puts the bigger picture into focus. It maps countries along 2 different axes, the first one being capacity, so that's the ability to execute space missions. And the second one is autonomy, so being able to go on these space missions independently. And as you can see on the top right of this grid, only 3 countries in the entire world, so the US, China, and Russia, currently qualify as fully fledged space powers. Meanwhile, Europe is stuck in the middle, and it's being classified as a skilled spacefaring nation. We have extraordinary strengths in Earth observation, navigation, and also scientific research, but we lack independent heavy lift launch capacity, secure communications infrastructure, and also a fully scaled private market. Moving Europe's dot from this middle point towards the top right of the grid would require 3 things. The first one being more regulatory harmonization, so that operators can face a single and predictable framework rather than 27 different ones. And the space package that was proposed in June is already putting us on that track. It may also potentially require industrial consolidation, so that European firms can pool resources and also compete at a global scale better. Lastly, strategic integration is needed to treat space as a dual-use domain, fully embedding it within Europe's defense planning. Without these steps, Europe does risk falling further behind. And this isn't just about prestige, as Amanda was mentioning earlier. The ability to move up on this grid towards the top right will really determine whether Europe is able to freely act in crises, whether we can launch our own satellites on our own terms, whether we can secure our communications without depending on anyone else, and whether we can maintain competitiveness in a sector that underpins really everything from agriculture to defense. In other words, Europe's position on this grid is not just a static description. It's truly a strategic choice. And so the decisions that we make in the coming years will really determine whether we remain in this middle area or whether we can move decisively towards the top and join the other competitive space powers.
Our main takeaway is this, that Europe is excellent at rulemaking, but you can only set rules for what you control. And if Europe wants credible strategic autonomy, it needs credible space autonomy. That means building launch capacity that meets demand, scaling downstream markets, and embedding space strategy into the overall EU's broader industrial and security agendas. And the EU space policy is a crucial first step, but the real test will be follow-through, turning ambition into capability and credibility. And before we close, I want to point you to two reports on this topic, Brussels, we have a problem, and Brussels, we have another problem, which are available on Politico Pro if you would like to go deeper. And with that, we'll turn the stage over to our next session, which asks a related question. If Europe needs partners in space, who can it trust here on Earth? You'll hear first from the Honorable Senator Mario Monti in conversation with Politico's Francesca Micheletti before the panel discussion, Alliances, Partnerships, and Relationships. Who can Europe trust? Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.